I never thought the person who would destroy my life would be the same man I called my brother for over 15 years. If someone had warned me, I would have laughed. I trusted him with my money, my family, my business, everything. And by the time I realized what he'd done, I had already lost it all. But here's the part he never saw coming. He thought I would disappear quietly. Instead, I spent the next 2 years destroying everything he built with nothing but the truth. This happened 3 years ago. I was 34 and had just sold my first software company for a little over $2 million. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was enough to change my life forever. My best friend Jake had been with me since college. We survived terrible apartments, ramen dinners, and endless nights chasing impossible dreams together. When I succeeded, I wanted him beside me. So I invested nearly $500,000 into his startup. No contracts between friends, just a handshake. Big mistake. At first, everything looked perfect. The company exploded, investors came in, the media loved his story, and every interview sounded the same. I built this company from nothing. Not once, not a single time, did he mention me. I ignored it. Recognition didn't matter, results did, or so I thought. Then one Friday afternoon, my accountant called. His voice sounded strange. Have you approved these transfers? What transfers? Silence. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. There are almost $400,000 missing. I laughed. I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. Someone had been moving money through accounts connected to the startup. The authorization carried my digital signature, except I had never signed anything. Someone had forged it. I immediately called Jake. No answer. Again, straight to voicemail. Again, blocked. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. I drove straight to the office. The building security guard stopped me at the entrance. I'm sorry, sir. Your access card was deactivated yesterday. Yesterday, nobody had told me. I called HR. Nothing. My email deleted. Company phone disconnected in less than 24 hours. I had been erased from the company I helped build. Standing in that parking lot, I realized my best friend hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my identity inside the company. And that wasn't even the worst part. Because while I was trying to figure out what happened, someone knocked on my front door. It was 2 federal investigators. One of them asked a question that nearly made me collapse. Are you aware that you're currently the primary suspect in a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation? My entire world went black. Jake hadn't just betrayed me. He had framed me, and at that exact moment, he was probably celebrating. What he didn't know was that he'd made one tiny mistake, a mistake so small, he never noticed it, but it would eventually cost him everything. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, keep listening. Because this revenge didn't happen overnight. It happened one careful move at a time, and by the end, the man who stole my life was begging for mercy. The moment those 2 federal investigators stepped into my house, I knew my life had changed forever. One of them opened a leather folder. The other placed a thick stack of documents on my dining table. Neither of them looked angry. That scared me even more. People who already believe you're guilty don't need to raise their voices. They simply wait for you to make a mistake. Mr. Carter, the older investigator began, we're giving you an opportunity to explain these transactions before this investigation moves forward. He slid the first document across the table. My name, my digital signature, and approval for a $1.2 million transfer. I've never seen this. He didn't react. Instead, he laid down another document, then another, then another. By the 5th page, my hands were shaking. Every transfer looked legitimate. Every email carried my address. Every signature matched perfectly. If I were investigating the case, I'd think I was guilty too. I didn't authorize any of this, I said. The younger investigator finally spoke. Then someone spent a very long time making it look like you did. That sentence stuck with me because whoever framed me hadn't acted overnight. This had been planned, months, maybe years in advance. They asked for my laptop, my phone, hard drives, business records, even old tax returns. I handed over everything without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. As they were leaving, the older investigator paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly, people who build evidence this carefully usually make one mistake. One mistake? Those words echoed in my mind. The same thought I'd had after Jake blocked my number. If there was one mistake, I had to find it before the investigators did. The next morning, the nightmare spread. Friends stopped answering my calls. Business contacts canceled meetings. One investor I'd known for years sent a short text. I can't be associated with this until everything is cleared up. I couldn't even blame him. Online articles had already started appearing. Software investor under federal fraud investigation. No conviction, no trial. Just accusations, but on the internet, accusations are often enough. Within 48 hours, I lost nearly every consulting contract I still had. Clients vanished. Speaking invitations disappeared. My phone stopped ringing. Except for one call, it came from Sarah. She had been our operations manager since the company's first year. If anyone knew what had happened inside that office, it was her. Her voice trembled. I can't talk long. Jake thinks everyone's watching me. My heart started racing. What do you know? There was silence. Then she whispered something that changed everything. He started removing your access months before you noticed. What? He told everyone you wanted to retire. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He said you were cashing out and moving overseas. It suddenly made sense. Every missing meeting, every decision I wasn't invited to, every document I never received. He hadn't erased me overnight. He'd slowly convinced everyone that I had already left by the time my access disappeared. Nobody questioned it. Sarah lowered her voice even further. There's something else. What? He had it archive one of the old backup servers. So, they forgot to destroy it. I froze. Every growing company creates backup servers. Old emails, draft files, internal logs, system records. Most people never think about them, but programmers do, especially programmers like me. Where is it? I asked. I don't know, but I know who does. Before she could say another word, the line went dead. She'd hung up, or someone had interrupted her. I called back immediately, straight to voicemail. Again, no answer. By that evening, her company email had been deleted. Her social media accounts disappeared. Even her LinkedIn profile was gone. It was as if she'd never existed. Jake wasn't just covering his tracks anymore. He was cleaning up witnesses, and that meant one thing. Sarah had told me the truth. Somewhere, an old backup server still existed, and buried inside it was the evidence Jake believed no one would ever find. The only question was, could I find it before he did? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing Jake's voice. No one believes the silent partner. Maybe he was right. Right now I didn't have proof. I only had questions. And questions don't save you in court. Evidence does. At 6 the next morning, I drove to a storage facility on the edge of town. When we first started the company, we couldn't afford cloud storage for everything. So every few months we'd back up our systems onto physical servers and store them in a rented climate-controlled unit. It was old-fashioned, but Jake used to call it our insurance policy. Ironically, it was about to become mine. The storage manager recognized me immediately. Morning, Mr. Carter. I need access to Unit 314. He frowned as he typed into his computer. I'm sorry, that unit was emptied last month. My stomach dropped. Who emptied it? He clicked through a few more screens. The authorization came from your business partner, Jake, of course. I need to see the security footage. I'm afraid we normally don't. I'll get a subpoena if I have to. He looked at me for a long moment before quietly nodding. 10 minutes later, I was watching surveillance footage. Jake arrived with 2 movers. They loaded nearly everything into a truck. Nearly one server rack remained in the back corner. It was covered by an old gray tarp. The movers never noticed it. Neither did Jake. My heart started pounding. Is that unit still empty? The manager smiled. No, that rack is still there. I practically ran down the hallway. Unit 314 looked exactly the way I remembered it. Dust covered everything. Boxes sat untouched. And hidden behind a pile of obsolete networking equipment was the forgotten backup server. Jake had overlooked it. I stared at it for several seconds before laughing for the first time in weeks. You finally made a mistake. I disconnected every cable and carefully loaded the server into my SUV. The entire drive home, I kept checking my mirrors. Maybe I was paranoid, maybe not, because twice the same black SUV appeared behind me. When I pulled into a gas station, it kept driving. I told myself it was nothing. Still, I took 3 different routes before heading home. The server powered on after a tense few minutes. Fans spun, lights flashed, then, nothing, password required. Of course, I tried the obvious ones, company name, founding date, Jake's birthday, nothing. Then I remembered something. Back in college, Jake used the same ridiculous password for almost everything. Our favorite pizza place. Followed by the year we met, I typed it in. Access granted. I actually laughed out loud. For someone smart enough to steal millions, Jake still had terrible password habits. The server contained thousands of archived emails, financial logs, meeting recordings, and internal chat backups. It would take days to search everything. Then I found a folder simply labeled Migration. Inside was another folder, Executive Access. I clicked it. There they were, system logs showing exactly when my permissions had been removed. Except they hadn't been removed the day HR claimed. They'd been quietly reduced over 7 months. Every month, a little more access disappeared. One folder, one permission, one account at a time. Jake hadn't erased me overnight. He'd slowly made me invisible. Anyone reviewing company records would think I'd simply stopped participating. It was brilliant and terrifying. Then I found something even bigger, a recorded board meeting. I pressed play. Jake stood in front of the investors. We've decided to transition Michael into an advisory role. One investor frowned. Does Michael know? Jake smiled. We've already discussed it privately. That conversation had never happened. He had lied directly to the board. Then another voice spoke. I'll need his written approval. Jake didn't hesitate. You'll have it tomorrow. The recording ended. The timestamp matched the exact day my digital signature first appeared on fraudulent transfers. I finally understood. He hadn't forged one document. He'd built an entire fake history around me. Every lie supported another lie. Every forged email explained another forged signature. Every fake meeting justified another missing record. It was a masterpiece of deception, but even masterpieces have cracks. I copied every file onto 3 encrypted drives. One stayed with me, one went into a bank safety deposit box. The third, I mailed anonymously to my attorney. If anything happened to me, the truth would survive. That evening my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A calm voice spoke. You've been asking a lot of questions. Who is this? You found something that doesn't belong to you. Every hair on my neck stood up. The caller knew about the server. I don't know what you're talking about. A quiet laugh. Check your driveway. The line went dead. I rushed to the window, parked outside my house. Was the same black SUV I'd seen earlier. Its engine was still running, and someone was sitting behind the wheel, watching my front door. The black SUV stayed parked across the street for almost 20 minutes. It never moved. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. Then, without warning, it pulled away. No screeching tires, no dramatic chase, just gone. Maybe it was meant to scare me. If it was, it worked. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside made me glance toward the window. Every passing set of headlights made me wonder if someone was coming back. The next morning, my attorney, Lisa, called. I've reviewed the files you sent. Her voice sounded different, more serious than I'd ever heard it. Tell me the truth, she said. Where did these come from? I found an old company backup. She paused for several seconds. Michael, if these logs are authentic, they change everything. My pulse quickened. The board meeting recording alone contradicts the official corporate records. Someone knowingly made false statements to investors. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. Lisa arranged a meeting with the federal investigators that afternoon. They listened without interrupting as we presented the archived system logs, email metadata, and the board recording. The older investigator leaned back in his chair. This doesn't clear you, he said. My heart sank. Then he continued. But it gives us a reason to investigate someone else. That was all I needed, not a victory, just a chance. As we left the building, my phone vibrated. It was Sarah. A single message. I can't talk, they're watching me, but I'm ready to tell the truth. A minute later, another message appeared. Meet me tomorrow, come alone. Before I could reply, the messages disappeared, deleted from the conversation. I stared at my phone, wondering if I'd imagined them. Then I noticed something else. Sarah hadn't deleted them. Someone had logged into her account remotely, and if they could do that, how much danger was she really in? I suddenly realized tomorrow's meeting might not just determine my future. It might determine whether Sarah lived long enough to testify. I arrived at the coffee shop 30 minutes early. Old habits die hard. When your freedom is on the line, you don't take chances. I chose a table near the back where I could see both entrances. Every person who walked in made my pulse jump. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., Sarah stepped through the door. She looked exhausted, dark circles framed her eyes, and she glanced over her shoulder twice before sitting down. "You came," I said. "I almost didn't." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They've been asking questions about me." She nodded, "Jake and the company's lawyers." A server placed 2 coffees on the table. Neither of us touched them. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I made copies." Inside was a USB flash drive and several printed emails. "I started saving things months ago," she admitted. "At first I thought Jake was just pushing you out of the company. Then I realized he was changing records." My hands trembled as I looked through the documents. Several emails had been altered after they were originally sent. Meeting minutes had been edited weeks later. Most importantly, there was an internal message from Jake to the IT director. "Remove Michael's permissions gradually. I don't want anyone noticing the transition." There it was, in black and white. The first direct instruction tying Jake to the scheme. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" I asked. Sarah looked down. "I was afraid. I have 2 kids. He told me if I spoke up, I'd never work in this industry again." I understood. Fear has a way of making good people stay silent. Then Sarah said something that changed the entire case. "There was someone else." I looked up. "What do you mean? Jake didn't do this alone." She slid one final document across the table. It wasn't from it. It wasn't from accounting. It was from the board of directors. One board member had quietly approved every major decision Jake made without asking questions. Not because they believed him. Because they were secretly benefiting from the fraud. Before I could read the rest, Sarah's phone buzzed. Her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. It was a message from Jake. "We need to talk." "I know where you are." Sarah slowly looked toward the front window. A black SUV had just pulled into the parking lot, and someone was getting out. Sarah froze. The color drained from her face as the driver's door of the black SUV opened. A man in a gray suit stepped out. He looked around the parking lot before walking toward the coffee shop. "I can't be seen with you," Sarah whispered. "You don't have to run." "I do." She stood so quickly that her chair scraped across the floor. Before I could stop her, she slipped through the rear exit. By the time I reached the back door, she was gone. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Don't follow her." I looked around. No one. Just a nearly empty alley and the sound of traffic in the distance. When I turned back toward the cafe, the man in the gray suit was standing inside, scanning the room. He wasn't looking for coffee. He was looking for me. I walked out the front entrance before he spotted me. My heart pounded all the way to my car. That afternoon, Lisa called. The investigators verified the server. I gripped the phone tighter. And they confirmed the timestamps haven't been altered. I closed my eyes. For weeks I had felt like I was drowning. Now, for the first time, I could finally see the surface. "But there's a problem," Lisa continued. "The evidence proves someone manipulated company records." "That's good." "It is." She paused. "But it still doesn't identify who physically approved the fraudulent transfers." Jake had covered that part carefully. Every forged document led back to me. Every fake authorization carried my credentials. Every trail seemed to stop at my desk. Unless there was another trail. I spent the rest of the evening searching the archived server. Thousands of files, millions of lines of logs, most of it was useless. Then, just after midnight, I noticed something strange. Every forged authorization had been submitted within the same 7-minute window. Not random. Not spread across different days. Exactly 7 minutes. Every single time. That wasn't human behavior. It looked automated. I searched for scheduled tasks, hidden scripts, background services. Then I found a folder that shouldn't have existed. Legacy automation. Inside was a disabled script. It had been renamed to look harmless, but when I opened it, my pulse quickened. The program automatically generated approval emails using stored executive credentials. Including mine. It wasn't just forging signatures, it was impersonating executives. Whoever created the script understood the company's internal systems better than almost anyone. Jake knew business, but he wasn't a programmer. Someone else had written it. Someone technical. Someone who had been in the room from the beginning. I leaned back in my chair. For weeks I'd believed Jake was the mastermind. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe he wasn't acting alone. Maybe someone else had planned the technical side while Jake handled the public image. I searched the script's creation history. One username appeared over and over. E. Morgan. I didn't recognize it until I checked an old employee directory. Eric Morgan, our first systems engineer. Brilliant. Quiet. The guy who had built the company's original server architecture. He had resigned almost 2 years earlier, or at least, that's what everyone believed. I searched public records. Nothing, no new jobs, no online activity. No professional profile updates. It was as if Eric had disappeared. Then another email caught my eye. A payroll report dated just 3 weeks earlier. Eric Morgan was still receiving payments, not as an employee, as a consultant. Jake had never let him go. He had hidden him. I immediately called Lisa. She answered on the second ring. I think I found another person involved. There was silence. Then she said quietly, if you're right. This case just became much bigger than fraud. I looked back at the monitor. Another notification had appeared from the archived server, one I hadn't noticed before. Remote login attempt detected. Someone, somewhere, had just tried to access the forgotten backup server, which meant only one thing: they finally knew it still existed. I unplugged the server immediately. The remote login attempt vanished. Whoever was trying to access it had lost their connection. But it was already too late. They knew, somehow, they knew the backup server had survived. I copied the newest log files onto an encrypted drive and locked the original server in a fireproof safe. Then I called Lisa. They tried to get in. Can you prove it? I have the access logs. Good, she replied. Don't touch anything else. Let the forensic team examine it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't acting alone anymore. The investigators had begun treating the server as evidence. That meant every new discovery could be independently verified, and that made it much harder for anyone to dismiss my claims. 2 days later, I sat in a federal office watching a digital forensics specialist examine the logs. She barely spoke for nearly an hour, then she looked up. These records are genuine. I let out a slow breath. She continued. The remote login originated from a laptop registered to the company. Lisa leaned forward. Can you identify the user? The specialist nodded. The credentials belong to Eric Morgan. My heart skipped a beat. So he's still involved? She shook her head. Not necessarily. What do you mean? The login used Eric's credentials. That doesn't prove Eric was behind the keyboard. Someone else could have stolen them. Another twist. Another dead end, or so I thought. That evening I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Michael, the voice sounded tired, older than I remembered. Who's this? It's Eric. I nearly dropped the phone. You've got some nerve calling me. I know, I've been looking for you, so has everyone else. He laughed bitterly. They're looking for the wrong person. I didn't say anything. I wasn't part of the fraud, he continued. But I knew something was wrong. Then why disappear? I didn't disappear. I ran. There was a difference. Eric explained that nearly 2 years earlier he'd discovered unusual requests coming from senior management. He was instructed to create automation tools that would simplify executive approvals. At first, the requests seemed harmless. Then they became stranger. Certain logs had to be hidden. Some audit trails had to be shortened. When he refused, he was offered a promotion. When he refused again, he was threatened with legal action over a confidentiality agreement. So I quit, he said, but before I left I copied everything. I sat upright. You have copies? Not anymore. They're hidden. Where? I'll tell you, but not over the phone. The next afternoon, Lisa arranged for Eric to meet us at a secure location with investigators present. When he walked into the room, he looked nothing like the confident engineer I remembered. He seemed exhausted, like someone who had spent years looking over his shoulder. He placed an old notebook on the table. I wrote everything down. Dates, names, conversations, requests, every unusual meeting, every instruction that didn't make sense. Then he looked directly at the lead investigator. I can tell you who ordered the software. The room fell silent. It wasn't Jake. My heart sank. If it wasn't Jake... Eric slowly turned another page. It was someone on the board. He slid a printed email across the table. The sender's name made every person in the room stop breathing. The board's chairman. The man investors trusted more than anyone else. The same man who had publicly praised Jake as a visionary. The conspiracy had never been about one dishonest founder. It reached all the way to the top. And if Eric's evidence held up, the investigation was about to expose far more than a single act of fraud. It was about to bring down the entire company. For a long moment, no one in the room said a word. The lead investigator picked up the email and read it twice. Then he looked at Eric. If this is authentic, you're accusing the chairman of one of the largest corporate fraud schemes we've investigated. Eric nodded. I know. And you're willing to testify under oath? Yes. He didn't hesitate. That was the moment I realized he had been waiting years to tell someone the truth. The next several weeks were a blur. Federal forensic experts verified Eric's notebook against the archived server. Every date matched. Every meeting appeared on company calendars. Every deleted email left behind tiny traces in backup logs that Jake and the others had never noticed. Piece by piece, the story they had built began to unravel. What had looked like isolated mistakes turned into a pattern, and patterns are hard to explain away. One afternoon, Lisa called with news I'd been praying to hear. The prosecutors are dropping you as the primary suspect. I closed my eyes. It wasn't a full victory, not yet, but for the first time since the investigation began, the weight on my shoulders felt just a little lighter. They're officially treating you as a cooperating witness. I thanked her, then sat in complete silence. For weeks I had imagined this moment. Instead of celebrating, I thought about everything I'd lost. My reputation, my business, friends who vanished the moment my name appeared in the headlines, even if the truth came out tomorrow. Some of those things would never come back. Across town, things inside the company were starting to change. Employees noticed investigators visiting more frequently. Departments were asked to preserve documents. Executives suddenly canceled vacations. Rumors spread through every office floor. People whispered in hallways. Meetings ended early. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone knew something was wrong. Then came the first real crack. The company's chief financial officer resigned without warning. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, investigators had interviewed him for nearly 8 hours the day before. 2 days later, another executive hired a criminal defense attorney. The board chairman canceled a major investor conference. The company's stock began to slide, not because anyone had announced charges, because confidence had disappeared. Investors can tolerate bad news. What they fear is uncertainty. And uncertainty was spreading faster than anyone could contain it. Then my phone rang. It was Jake, for the first time in months. I stared at the screen. Lisa had already warned me not to discuss the case, so I answered with one simple sentence. I'm recording this call. There was a long pause. Jake sighed. You've made your point. My point? I know you've been talking to investigators. I've been telling the truth. Another silence. Then his voice changed, less confident, almost desperate. You don't understand what's happening. No, I replied calmly. I understand exactly what's happening. You framed me. You stole from investors. You destroyed my career. You let everyone believe I was a criminal. He didn't deny any of it. Instead, he asked a question that surprised me. Do you think they'll protect you? I frowned. What are you talking about? The people above me? They're not going down alone. Before I could respond, he hung up. I replayed those words in my head, the people above me. Jake had finally admitted something without realizing it. He wasn't the one in control. He never had been. The next morning, the lead investigator called. We need you to come in. Why? We've received new evidence overnight. What kind of evidence? It came anonymously. My pulse quickened. What's in it? He took a slow breath. A complete copy of the company's private messaging system. I nearly dropped the phone. Who sent it? We don't know, but whoever did, they just handed us the missing piece. And someone inside that company had decided it was finally time to tell the truth. The investigators didn't tell me much over the phone, only that I needed to be there. Immediately. By the time I arrived, Lisa was already waiting outside the conference room. She looked tired, but for the first time since we'd met, she was smiling. I think this is the turning point. Inside the room, a large monitor displayed thousands of company messages. The anonymous sender hadn't forwarded a few screenshots. They had copied the entire internal messaging system, years of conversations, private executive chats, deleted channels, archived files, everything. The forensic team had already confirmed one thing: the data hadn't been altered. It was authentic. The lead investigator pointed to one conversation. This is where we started. On the screen was a private chat between Jake and the board chairman, dated nearly 2 years earlier. Jake, Michael is asking too many questions. Chairman, then make sure he stops asking them. A chill ran through me. The investigator opened another conversation. Jake, he's still listed on several approval chains. Chairman, fix it gradually, we don't want anyone noticing. Another message, Jake, what if he refuses? The reply appeared on the screen. He won't know what's happening until it's too late. The room fell silent. For months, everyone had treated my story as an accusation. Now, the people responsible had explained their own plan in writing. No assumptions, no guesses, just their own words. The investigators continued scrolling. The messages painted the same picture over and over. They discussed altering records, controlling information, managing public perception. One executive even warned that forcing everything through too quickly might attract attention. The chairman responded with a single sentence. People believe confidence more than facts. I remembered every interview Jake had given, every speech, every article. Confidence had become their greatest weapon, until now. Because digital records don't care how confident you sound. They simply tell the truth. A week later, the first public announcement arrived. Federal authorities confirmed they had expanded the investigation and were reviewing evidence involving multiple executives. My name wasn't mentioned as a suspect. Instead, I was identified as someone cooperating with investigators. The difference was only a few words, but it changed everything. Old colleagues started calling. Former clients sent messages apologizing for disappearing. One investor admitted he should have trusted me from the beginning. I appreciated the apologies, but they couldn't erase the months I'd spent wondering if my life was over. Trust, once broken, rarely returns exactly as it was. The company's board held an emergency meeting. Within hours, the chairman announced his resignation. Officially, he claimed it was to allow the investigation to proceed without distraction. Unofficially, everyone knew the pressure had become impossible to ignore. Jake disappeared from public view. Television interviews stopped. His social media accounts went silent. The confident entrepreneur who once stood on conference stages was nowhere to be found. For the first time since this began, he wasn't controlling the story anymore. The evidence was. Then Lisa called with one final surprise. We've identified the anonymous source. I leaned forward. Who was it? She smiled. You already know them? I searched my memory. Sarah, Eric, one of the investigators. Lisa slowly shook her head. It was the company's head of cybersecurity. I frowned. I barely knew him. Neither did anyone else, Lisa said. He watched what was happening for months. He couldn't prove it. Until he found the archived messages. He realized that if he stayed silent, he'd become part of the cover-up. Sometimes. The people who change everything aren't the loudest voices in the room. They're the ones who quietly decide that the truth matters more than their own comfort. As I looked out the window of Lisa's office, my phone buzzed one more time. A news alert flashed across the screen. Federal prosecutors had announced formal charges. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin, and this time, everyone would finally hear the whole story. 8 months after 2 federal investigators knocked on my front door, I walked into the courthouse through the same entrance they did. Only this time, I wasn't the man everyone suspected. I was there to tell the truth. Outside, television cameras lined the sidewalk. Reporters called out names as attorneys hurried past. For months, I'd avoided every interview, not because I had something to hide, because I wanted the facts to speak louder than my emotions. Now they finally could. Inside the courtroom, I saw Jake for the first time since everything fell apart. He looked older, not by years, by stress. The expensive suits were still there. The polished appearance was still there. but the confidence I'd seen on magazine covers had vanished. For a brief moment our eyes met. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? We had once celebrated birthdays together. Our families spent holidays under the same roof. We'd promised to support each other no matter what. Now we were separated by a courtroom and a mountain of evidence. The prosecution spent the first week laying out the timeline, every bank transfer, every altered email, every system log, every board meeting. The jurors watched carefully as forensic specialists explained how digital records preserve tiny details that are almost impossible to fake consistently. The archived server, the approval logs, the internal messages. One by one, each piece fit together, not like isolated events, like parts of a puzzle. By the end of the week, the picture was becoming impossible to ignore. Then it was my turn to testify. The courtroom felt strangely quiet as I walked to the witness stand. I took the oath, sat down, and looked toward the jury. The prosecutor began with simple questions: my background, my company, my friendship with Jake. Then came the harder ones. Why did you invest without stronger legal protections? I smiled sadly, because I trusted my best friend. No one spoke. The silence said enough. For hours, I explained how our friendship began, how the company grew, and how I slowly disappeared from decisions I once helped make. I wasn't there to attack Jake. I was there to explain what happened. The evidence would do the rest. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination. Mr. Carter, he began, isn't it possible you're simply upset because the company succeeded without you? I looked directly at him. If that were true, I wouldn't have invested in it. A few jurors nodded. He changed tactics. You expect this jury to believe an entire company conspired against one person? No, I answered calmly. I expect them to believe the evidence. He held up a forged approval document. This bears your signature. It bears a copy of my signature. He held up another. And this email came from your account? The forensic report explains how that account was impersonated. Every question returned to the same place. The evidence, not opinions, not assumptions, facts. After nearly 2 hours, the defense attorney sat down. He had asked dozens of questions, but he hadn't changed a single document. Over the next several days, expert witnesses testified. Digital forensic analysts explained the server logs. Financial investigators traced the movement of funds. Sarah described how my access had been removed little by little over several months. Eric explained how the automation tools had been requested and later misused. Each witness added another layer. Not one contradicted the others. Instead, their stories connected perfectly. Then came the moment no one expected. Jake informed the court that he wanted to testify. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. Defendants don't always take the stand. It can be risky. His attorney clearly advised against it, but Jake insisted. As he walked toward the witness stand, I couldn't help wondering why. Was he finally ready to tell the truth, or did he still believe he could talk his way out of it? Whatever his reason, everything was about to change. Because once he took that oath, every answer would carry consequences. And one question in particular had been waiting for him since the very beginning. If you built the company alone, why did you spend 2 years pretending I had never been part of it? The courtroom became so quiet you could hear papers turning. Jake adjusted the microphone. For a moment, he looked exactly like the confident entrepreneur I'd watched on conference stages. He smiled politely at the jury. Then the questioning began. His attorney started with the basics. Yes, he founded the company. Yes, he believed in its mission. Yes, mistakes had been made. But according to Jake, those mistakes were the result of rapid growth and poor internal controls, not a coordinated effort to frame anyone. It sounded convincing at first. Then the prosecutor stood. She walked slowly to the center of the courtroom and placed a single binder on the podium. Mr. Reynolds, she began, I'd like to discuss this message. She projected it onto a large screen. The same internal chat the investigators had recovered. Fix it gradually, we don't want anyone noticing. Jake shifted in his seat. I don't remember that specific conversation. The prosecutor nodded. That's understandable. It took place almost 2 years ago. She clicked to the next page. Another message, then another. Each one matched a meeting, a transfer, or a change in company records. The timestamps aligned. The participants matched. The metadata confirmed they hadn't been altered. One by one, the messages painted a picture that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The prosecutor paused. Mr. Reynolds, can you explain why Mr. Carter's system permissions were reduced over 7 months while board members were told he had chosen to step away from the company? Jake hesitated. I relied on information from others. Who? I don't recall. The prosecutor didn't argue. She simply moved to the next exhibit, a recording from the archived server. The jury listened as Jake assured investors that I had approved a transition plan. The recording ended. The prosecutor looked at him. Did that meeting with Mr. Carter ever happen? Jake stared at the table. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally, he answered. No, it was the first clear admission anyone had heard, not because it solved everything, but because it confirmed that the official story had been false. The courtroom felt different after that. The confidence Jake had walked in with began to fade. Each answer became shorter, less certain, more cautious. The defense tried to shift responsibility. They argued that the board had enormous influence over company decisions, that executives often relied on legal and technical teams, that poor judgment shouldn't automatically be treated as criminal intent. Some jurors took careful notes, others watched quietly. No one revealed what they were thinking. Over the following days, both sides presented their closing arguments. The prosecution focused on the evidence, not emotion. Not speculation, just records, testimony, and timelines. The defense reminded the jury that large organizations are complicated and that responsibility can be difficult to assign. When the judge finished reading the instructions, the jurors filed out of the courtroom. Then everyone waited. One day passed, then another. By the third afternoon, every conversation in the courthouse stopped when the courtroom deputy entered. The jury has reached a verdict. My heart pounded. Jake looked straight ahead. No expression. The judge thanked the jurors for their service and asked the foreperson to stand. The envelope was handed to the clerk. The courtroom held its breath. Whatever happened next wouldn't erase the past. It wouldn't give me back the months I'd spent under suspicion. It wouldn't restore every friendship or every opportunity I'd lost. But it would answer the question that had followed me from the very beginning. Would the truth be enough? The clerk unfolded the verdict form, then began to read. The courtroom was completely silent. The clerk looked down at the verdict form one last time before reading it aloud. On count 1, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the next words. We find the defendant, a pause, guilty, no cheers. No dramatic reactions, just silence. One count became another, then another. As the clerk continued reading, it became clear that the jury had accepted the evidence presented throughout the trial. The records, testimony, and forensic analysis had told a consistent story, and the verdict reflected that. Jake remained still. He didn't look at me, he didn't look at the jury, he simply stared at the table in front of him. The judge thanked the jurors for their service and scheduled a later hearing to determine the appropriate sentence. When we stepped outside the courthouse, the cameras were waiting. For months, reporters had wanted a statement. I had always declined. This time I stopped. A reporter asked the first question. Mr. Carter, how does it feel to finally be vindicated? I thought about everything that had happened. The friendships I'd lost. The nights I couldn't sleep. The fear that my name would forever be tied to a crime I didn't commit. Then I answered honestly. The verdict matters. But what matters even more is that the truth came out. I hope people remember that accusations aren't the same as proof. That was all I said. Then I walked away. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. The legal process continued, but I stayed out of the spotlight. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. I accepted consulting work again. Some former clients returned, others didn't. That was okay. Trust takes time to rebuild. I also reached out to people who had stood by me when everything seemed hopeless. Lisa, Sarah, Eric, without them the truth might never have surfaced. We stayed in touch not because of the case, but because difficult times have a way of showing you who your real friends are. About a year later, I started a small cybersecurity company. This time, I did things differently. Every investment had clear agreements. Every important decision was documented. Every employee understood that transparency wasn't just a policy, it was part of the company's culture. The experience had changed me. Not by making me cynical, by making me wiser. A few months ago, I received an unexpected email. It wasn't from a lawyer or a journalist, it was from a young entrepreneur, he wrote. Your story made me rethink how I structure my business partnerships. I realized that trust and accountability aren't opposites, they belong together. I read that message 3 times. If sharing my experience helped even one person avoid the mistakes I made, then something good had come from all of it. Reddit update: a lot of people have asked whether I hate Jake. The honest answer is, no, for a long time I did. But carrying that anger only kept me connected to the worst chapter of my life. Eventually, I realized something. Justice isn't about getting even. It's about letting the truth stand on its own. I don't think about Jake very often anymore. I think about the people who helped me when it would have been easier to walk away. If you're reading this because you've been betrayed by someone you trusted, here's what I learned. Keep records. Ask questions, don't confuse friendship with accountability, and if the truth is on your side, don't give up. Sometimes it takes far longer than you'd like. Sometimes it feels like no one believes you. But sooner or later, the facts have a way of finding daylight. As for me, life isn't perfect, but it's peaceful, and after everything that happened, peace is worth more than all the money I ever lost.